A lot.
All right. Good
Hello,
morning.
everyone.
Hey.
I never say good morning because we got people all over the world maybe
Oh, that's right.
participating, right?
Good
So,
day. Good day.
yes, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Uh, we are excited to be with you today to talk about long distance behavior driven development, working effectively with remote developers. Um, I find this topic to be very valuable, but it's not as well known as you would expect. Um, it's Wyatt. What do you think? I mean, do people? I talk to a lot of folks, even in industrial logic. Not that many people have done this.
Yeah, it's foreign, but once you try it, then it's like, whoa, how come we've never done this before? I mean, it's sort of that, you know,
Yeah,
experience.
I mean, there's a time and a place for this particular technique, and we don't use it all the time. But when you are separated by distance, long distance, let's say,
Mhm.
where it's harder to collaborate live, this becomes an effective tool in your tool chest if you want to have it. And
Yeah.
we'll be describing it and discussing it, and maybe start with a more recent story. As always, though, we really appreciate you being here. We appreciate your comments, your questions, your concerns, anything like that. So please don't be shy, and hey, post something in the chat. Even tell us where you are, where you're coming from. We want to see, you
Or
know.
your favorite recipe.
So, we by the way, when we say BDD, behavior driven development, this can go by a variety of names.
Mm.
The name is less important than the practice itself, and why this makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so, Wyatt, should we dive maybe into a relatively recent example of?
Yeah, it's fresh on our minds for sure.
Okay,
Set the stage.
yeah, I'll set the stage. We were building a large, complicated point of sale system for a company, and the team size was too small to deal with all the complexity in this point of sale. It's a relatively mature and complicated system. It had been written in iOS and Objective C and a little bit of Swift, but mostly Objective C many years ago. 10-year-old piece of code.
That's
Rewriting
important.
it, yeah, it
Yeah, it
is.
has been in it has been functioning for this client for 10 years.
That's correct. And with many companies using it
Yeah.
around the world. And we were rewriting it. There were very good reasons for rewriting it. A lot of people always wonder, why are you rewriting it? Why not improve what's there? Well, I don't want to get into those details because they're unrelated to this topic, but very good reasons to rewrite it in modern technology to support Android and iOS devices. So uh, at a certain point, our team size helping this client was too small. We needed more people. Our throughput measures, forecasting, Monte Carlos, all that great stuff was telling us there's no way we're going to get this done in the time the client wants without a bigger team.
That's right.
Now, a lot of people would say, well, adding people to a project not going to make it go any faster.
If you do it
No,
correctly.
yeah, I'd say that's true, except if you're dealing with like awesome extreme programmers around the
Right.
world joining your project, then that advice does not apply. And if you use practices that actually help with the distributed communication. So we assembled a team of people around the world. We had people in India, we had people in Europe, we had people in America, we had people in
Yeah.
South America.
Multiple
So
time zones. Yeah.
4 different major time zones there. And we designed this. Wyatt and I actually sat down and noodled this out and figured out, like, what are we going to need to make this successful? And one of the things we came up with was we need to be doing long distance BDD.
Well, before that, so the client said, we asked for the requirements, right? They said, well, you have a working piece of software. That's your requirements.
Yeah.
And and then we started working on it and we thought we were done with something. I said, oh no, it's missing all these features of these capabilities, right? And then we discussed this and we discovered we are never going to finish this project in this manner. So we then talked about we need requirements, and the requirements were in the BDD.
Yes. And they were basically in the form of acceptance criteria.
Yes.
So while we were doing lots of other good practices like test-driven development and trunk-based development and all that good stuff, continuous integration, and we were getting, rough requirements, but we were not getting the nuances. We were not getting into the weeds, into the details of each and every feature in this complicated point of sale. So we knew we'd have to communicate that effectively across large geographical, distances. And I don't want to pretend that it was all just this one practice that saved us, because there's a lot more to it, right? When you bring people on to a new project, how do you share knowledge quickly? How do you get them up to speed quickly? Well, the way we do it is ensembling. We ensemble. And so ensembling was a part of this. But that alone wasn't enough. We needed to also get better at requirements. So let's talk about this then. Let's talk a little bit about the work we did for the ACs. The ACs is our way of talking about acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
What did we do?
We got the key folks on the client side, actually the people who had written the original software. We got testers involved. We got the devs involved. We got Munib involved on our side. We basically identified personas for the activities going through the flow and what were the activities of the application. And then we wrote tests. We did the Gherkin style, given when then. And we did that because that was easier for the client to grasp. And we ended up using those tests with the stakeholders, the senior exec at this client, in describing what they will see as far as progress in the application. It was an amazing tool, as Josh says, and communicating not just within ourselves and the team, but with the client, because they could understand the business language and they could understand what they would see. Now, we wanted to automate these at some point, but we didn't. We didn't because just a number of factors on the client side. So if you would think, I don't know if folks understand London, Chicago style. London is outside. And so we had the BDD, we had the test that defined the activities and the behavior of the system. And then our devs, we wrote unit tests from the inside out to meet the capabilities of these behavior tests. Thousands and thousands and thousands of micro tests is what micro unit tests. We call them micro tests inside IL. And we did that. And that was a way of us communicating and making sure that we knew that we had the capabilities in the system. I'm going to add more to that, but not right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's separate out this one part, which is by clearly defining acceptance criteria in the form of what we call scenarios. So we were specifying mini scenarios for a given, let's say, story. And that's really, really clear behavior of expectations, right? What we expect. So sharing that with, let's say, new XP friends of ours from India who were in an ensemble, but weren't in an ensemble all the time with people in the US who are veterans of the project, right? At some point, they're on their own. They're on their own in an ensemble in India. Okay, great. How do they know they're doing the right thing? The acceptance criteria in these mini specifications or mini scenarios explained it in nice detail, right? So again, that came from our folks in the USA who were very close to the product management, close to the people who wrote the original point of sale, writing really super clear given when then scenarios and sharing them with people around the globe. So that practice is what we're talking about here, the long distance BDD. That is to say, a lot of folks would say you've got to have your product owner or your product manager with the team if you ever expect to have good results. Not true. If you have to, you can ship out extremely clear mini, really small,
really small
specifications at a user story level that are basically binary, meaning either you pass or you fail that scenario, right? Either the code does what it's supposed to do or it doesn't. Now, is it well designed? Another story, but does it do what the scenario says? And by getting to that mini specification level, you are communicating effectively across thousands of miles, and it just works. And this is not an isolated example of this. I can go way back in using this particular technique. Okay, we just used it recently, and so it comes up. It's come up with a recent client as well, another client where they have people in Houston and they have people in India, and they're thinking about how do we get them to collaborate effectively? Do we need our product owners in India? And my answer is you do not. Okay.
But one thing we have to do is we have to move testing further to the left.
Yes.
That's the key thing, right? Because even with the client that we're talking about, well, actually, in all situations, we have seen that testing is an afterthought, right? And so by moving testing to the left, close to the beginning, identifying what the acceptance criteria is, it helps everyone to understand what is the expectation.
And testers love this too, because they become part of creating the software rather than just trying to break the software. So we've been doing this for over 25 years now, is bringing testers to the front of the software development cycle and saying, collaborate with us on acceptance criteria for stories. Scoped, right? What's the scope of this story? It maybe not be the full version of it that we're going to eventually build. It's a primitive version. Great. What's acceptance criteria for the primitive version?
Yeah. And
define it in acceptance criteria. You can do it in all sorts of ways. Many years ago, we didn't use given when then, and we still succeeded.
Yeah.
Right. It's what's going in and what's coming out is ultimately what you're talking about. Right.
That's right.
So yeah, it's good to see Dave Rooney here. I'm not seeing many others around, but if you want, say something, be public. So there are a lot of practices that go hand in hand with anything that we do here at Industrial Logic, and I'm sure our other craftsperson friends do. So I never want to just say this is a silver bullet. This is the only thing you need to do. What we are saying here is if you have remote developers and you have product management knowledge in one isolated area of the world,
that's right.
You're not stuck.
That's right.
You're not stuck. You can do effective, agile development in that scenario. And it comes down to this practice of defining the mini specifications and flowing them out on a regular basis out to developers and kind of seeing that results come back quickly.
That's right.
That's it. We're done.
Well, here's another client that we dealt with in Detroit, Michigan area, and this is exactly to what you're talking about, Josh. We had product and the senior tech lead in the States, and we had the developers and the testers in Pune, India, and actually in multiple locations, and there were tons of rework from that the teams were experiencing, that product was experiencing in Detroit. And the rework is because folks did not know clearly what the requirements were, and they misinterpreted the requirements. And then the tech lead was complaining because he didn't have time to be just with that team. He was rotating across other teams. And so we implemented what you said, what you outlined, is that we identified in a small batch, what were some of the behaviors that they expected, that they wanted from this code base. And we sent them over there and we moved testing to the left. And we started to see the rework count drop, 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 and drop. It was almost nil. And quality went up. And they were able to flow things through the system much more quickly. Now, I will say it wasn't a toggle switch. It didn't happen overnight. The first time I saw some of the test files, it was given one, then, right? I mean, literally, and
Yeah.
that's really what it was like. And then so we worked on that. So we made the capabilities and the expectations much more smaller and really concise, and that was a huge improvement to their um, ability to feel success and reduce the waste and the rework.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if people have ever seen this famous video of when wolves were reintroduced back into Yellowstone National Park. I mean, sounds like I'm on a giant pivot here, but I promise you I'll come back to this topic. But when wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone Park, um, everything started to change for the better. And they watched this process unfold over many years, and it was just an incredible thing. I believe that when you start working tiny or working really small,
Yes.
that is the same kind of effect you're going to start to see, like the wolves. Everything starts to get better. So when Wyatt's talking about tiny specifications that don't have a lot of ands and thens and ands and thens, but is just very scoped down to a very narrow case of behavior, right? Hard to argue with, hard to misinterpret, and relatively easy to code.
And easy to find if there's a defect,
Right. Yeah. Because it's
right?
like, okay, this thing failed. It should have passed. And
Exactly.
it's very clear what we're expecting. So learning to work small is probably the subtext of this whole conversation, right? If you don't know how to work small, if you don't know how to break down big things into small things and then take those small things and turn them into even smaller
That's right.
ACs, acceptance criteria, uh, you're not going to succeed at this. So that's probably the very first thing you must learn if you want to be able to be successful at this level. Because overly complicated acceptance criteria isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
It's important to learn how to create a small user story, a primitive version of what you ultimately want to build.
Yeah.
That's something we take for granted around here, right? We've been doing it for so many decades now that it's just assumed. But a lot of people still don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
In my experience, I'm not sure. Do you see that, Wyatt?
No, definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it really is. I'm surprised at how often I see tests that are so unnecessarily complicated. It's not intentionally made like that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like they just don't know. And if that's the world you live in, that's what you think it needs to be complex, that's how you write it.
And I think partly it's because people are used to saying yes at work instead of no. Meaning, when we make a very small user story, like a primitive version of what will eventually evolve into the final version, we've said no to a lot of things. No, it won't do this. No, it won't do that. No, it won't do this other thing.
Yeah.
Right? You see the guitars behind me here. This is something we've used quite a bit. The first version of the guitar has maybe one string. It doesn't have a sound hole. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have all these things. It's a primitive whole. It's a whole guitar, just like it's a whole feature, but it's very primitive. And you have to say no in order to do that. No, I'm not going to build in the complex tax logic. No, I'm not going to build in the interest rate stuff. No, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not. I'm going to go very, very, very primitive here. And my acceptance criteria is going to be pretty basic because of it.
Yeah.
You got to master that. Bill Wake used to call it how to make a long story short. And there's lots of people out there, in our community who have, talked about this. J.B. Rainsberger, I believe, was talking about sashimi, stories sashimi and ways to slice and dice this stuff. Alistair Colburn's mentioned elephant carpaccio,
Yeah.
slicing the elephant down. We
One bite at a time.
talk about, walking skeletons, but this is the essence of what we're saying here is without the ability to break things down into small things, you're not going to succeed.
That's
So
right.
you have to learn that. Once you learn that, you can start to get this process of defining these very mini acceptance criteria or Gherkin style, communications, whatever you like, and then send those off to in remote distances and see what happens.
Yeah. I will add, remember when the client that we're talking about for the point of sale, we also use the ACs as a line in the sand.
Right.
Remember?
Right. Yes.
Because otherwise, if we didn't, we would never have been able to finish that project.
Yeah.
So what we did is, as we got together, before we took the story, we confirmed that the ACs were accurate and they were all encompassing. And if they weren't, we modified it. But as soon as we started to work on it and they went, we're missing an AC, sorry, it's not in this amount of work. We can add it to a list to be done at a later point.
Yes, that was a great point you made. It was a bit of rigor that we expected from the process.
That's right.
I'm talking to my dog on the side here. Sorry, but yes, it was a bit of rigor that we insisted on because with such subtlety of behavior in this system, we had to nail it down.
That's right.
And so the client really needed to help us define the acceptance criteria for any given story.
Yeah, it was great having product and testers fully involved with that.
Now, I want to tell another story from several years back when I was helping a company in Toronto. The company makes mass spectrometers. So they make their own hardware. A mass spectrometer is something that can really deeply analyze substances. So it's used in all kinds of industries, from bioterrorism to oil and gas to healthcare, analyzing substances with mass spectrometers. So the company makes their own mass spectrometers, makes their own software for the mass spectrometers, and is an industry leader. And they were making a brand new mass spectrometer. There are many different, versions of them, like printers, like there's mass spectrometers. And this particular time, they decided we're going to partner with a company in Australia. For the very first time, we're going to actually outsource the hardware development. And we basically help them launch that. And go, Max, go. Sorry. Oh, God.
It's all
Pleasures
good.
of doing a live event with dogs around.
It's fine. It's all good. Keep going.
So basically, for the very first time, this company decided they're going to outsource the hardware creation to a company in Australia. So they're in Toronto, the company's in Australia. The company in Australia was also chartered to create the embedded software for this mass spectrometer, right? So they're building the hardware and they're building the software that runs on that hardware. Okay. So our team was tasked with, making this a success. And we did some amazing chartering, got really clear. And this was actually for bioterrorism, for fighting bioterrorism. And here's how we did it. We sent acceptance criteria, tiny little acceptance criteria for any given user story all the way to Australia. And software would come back and it would either pass or fail our suite of acceptance criteria. And just fast forward to the end of the project, the software was put onto the hardware and it just worked.
Nice.
It just worked. There were no problems. It was as smooth as glass. So it was, again, long distance collaboration where the primary means of communication was acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
I don't think we were using Gherkin back then, but it was very clear what are the expected inputs, what are the expected outputs for any given scenario. And that really was the first time, we're talking way back now when we first did that. It was the first time I felt like this particular practice has legs, that this thing can work really well in a long distance situation.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to a couple of things though about when not to use this technique, right? So one thing we talk about around here sometimes is bargain hunting, right? So there's a little bit of a nature here of the split between product management and development and what we've been talking about, right? Product management defines what to build, development builds it. And we're talking about acceptance criteria for making that crystal clear. In a more ideal scenario, to me, you've got a product team collaborating on what the heck to build.
Yeah.
So the developers have a say in should we build that feature or not, right? They might have opinions. They might have ideas from the user community. They may differ with a product manager, or we have stories we've told about that here too, where development came up with a simpler process, simpler idea for a feature than product management did, right?
Yeah.
And so that's much, much, much better, right? You're going to incur some drag by just having that traditional split between product management and development that happens with long distance BDD. So in a long distance BDD situation, you're not in the ideal scenario that I would think of as deep collaboration of a product team, right? However, it's an effective practice in that scenario, when you need it.
Yeah. I would say I would switch the words a little bit. Instead of saying to talk about or decide what we're going to build, is to understand what the outcome is.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And so, and from that outcome, we might go, oh, we can do some bargain hunting here.
Yeah, there's different ways to go about it, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not able to collaborate with those developers because they're thousands of miles away,
Yeah.
Or you can only collaborate maybe a few times a week at midnight, you're just not going to have that practice be as powerful as it can be when you're a little more co-located, or at least in the same time zone or close to the same time zone.
Yeah. I'm reminded of maybe you can tell the story. You know the story really well. It's the spreadsheet story where we're dealing with one of our clients and dealers, right?
Yep.
I'll let you tell it. I'll let you tell it.
Well, I mean, it's such a good story that I put it in Joy of Agility, and I'm always going to pump the buck here. You gotta pimp your book, but it's about disobeying a product owner, and it's a wonderful story because it's where the developers saw a far simpler, far more efficient way to solve a customer need than doing what the product owner wanted them to do, which would have been horrendous, a terrible user interface, terrible interaction, and taking a lot longer to build. So it involves simply producing a spreadsheet, giving it to the users, and the users loving it, and having usage data that showed that they loved it. Usage.
Yeah.
That is,
they waited 2 years for that capability.
2 years for a very simple. So developers are smart, and in great product teams, they're part of the strategy for what to actually build, for what outcomes, as you said, Wyatt, you're looking for. Distributed BDD or long distance BDD like this tends not to leverage that particular thing as much, right?
It definitely adds clarity with expectations and communication for sure.
Right. So I just want to say, you don't need anything fancy to do long distance BDD. You could literally do it with a spreadsheet where you define, expected inputs and outputs for any given user story. You can do it with these little given when then scenarios. If you're not familiar with that, you can simply learn Gherkin.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like, and again, what Wyatt said is it's not the full, you don't even have to automate these little mini specifications. You don't have to automate them. We prefer to have some kind of automated checking.
Mm-hmm.
So with the way we build software, we're going to end up with some automated checking to see that things work. But is that at the low level, or is it at the high level, or is there a mixture of the two? Whatever we see fit to create for automation happens. But it's the clarity of what to work on that's so critical.
Yeah, I want to add some clarity. So when I said not automated. We didn't automate the end-to-end behavior side, but we did automate with thousands and thousands of micro tests.
Right. Right.
And so that was a safety net, and that those were like really super fast feedback loops.
Yeah, I think there were almost 7,000 of those tests that ended up getting written over the course of about a year and a half. And yeah, huge safety net. The safety nets help us go faster. So another thing to reiterate too is this doesn't mean that you never ensemble. There are times when it's great to get together. Even if you got a team in Toronto and a team in Australia, you need a little FaceTime typically to get sorted on some things, but including the process. What is the process we're going to use?
Yeah.
But once it's up and running, it tends to be very smooth. And that's contingent on seeing results on a daily or every other day basis. If you're not seeing actual running software, working software from this, you're doing it wrong. You're producing these mini specifications mean that a mini amount of work got done in order to pass them, and you're seeing that running. If you're not, something's off.
Yeah. So with the 4 teams that we had across the major time zones, any team was able to pull a story with the ACs and work on it because it was so clear.
Right.
Anybody. And if there are any questions, everyone had an idea of what it was.
Yeah.
It's because they ensembled and they clarified before they worked on it.
And again, I'd say it's a really nice practice in a deeply distributed team that is geographically distributed by thousands of miles. It suffers from the lack of, to me, the collaboration on what to build that we love to see in really empowered product teams. But if you have that scenario, it's a great practice. So I didn't see too many questions today, but that's okay. If you have some questions after watching the video, please post them. Wyatt, I think we've covered this topic.
I think so. It is a fun topic. It just brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see it running smoothly, and yeah, give it a try in your shop if you see it as a fit. Any questions, send them our way, and thank you all for watching.
Drop us a note, if you find success with this and what you've learned. We'd love to hear, feedback. So
yeah, thanks everyone. See you next time.
Cheers.